The old mansion on the outskirts of town had always been shrouded in mystery. For decades, it stood abandoned, its windows shattered and its doors creaking ominously in the wind. Local children would dare each other to approach its rusted gates, but none dared to venture inside. The mansion was said to be cursed, haunted by a dark history that kept even the bravest souls at bay. One stormy night, a group of college friends, Mark, Sarah, Jake, and Emily, decided to explore the mansion. They had heard the legends and wanted to prove to themselves that the stories were just that, stories. Armed with flashlights and a video camera, they made their way through the overgrown path leading to the front entrance. The front door groaned as they pushed it open, revealing a grand foyer covered in dust and cobwebs. Their footsteps echoed eerily as they wandered through the empty halls, their flashlights casting long, unsettling shadows on the walls. "Do you hear that?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. The others stopped and strained their ears, catching the faint sound of something dripping. It seemed to be coming from upstairs. "Let's check it out," Mark suggested, leading the way up the grand staircase. As they climbed, the dripping sound grew louder, accompanied by a faint, metallic scent that made their stomachs churn. They reached the top of the stairs and followed the sound to a large, ornate door at the end of the hallway. Unlike the rest of the house, the door appeared to be in pristine condition, its deep red paint gleaming in the dim light. "The Red Room," Jake muttered, recalling the stories they had heard. The room was said to be the heart of the mansion's darkness, a place where unspeakable acts had occurred. With a mixture of curiosity and dread, Mark turned the handle and pushed the door open. The sight that greeted them was horrifying. The room was bathed in a sickly red glow, its walls covered in dark, coagulated blood. Chains hung from the ceiling, some ending in rusted hooks, others in manacles. In the center of the room stood a large, wooden table, stained dark with the blood of countless victims. Emily screamed, and the others recoiled in horror, the stench of death overwhelming their senses. As they turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang. The room grew colder, and the red light intensified, casting everything in a hellish hue. "What's happening?" Sarah cried, banging on the door. But it wouldn't budge. The air grew thick with the sound of whispers, low and guttural, echoing from the walls. "We need to get out of here," Mark shouted, trying to force the door open. But it was no use. Suddenly, the chains began to rattle, as if pulled by invisible hands. The friends watched in terror as the chains moved towards them, coiling like serpents. One by one, they were ensnared, the cold metal biting into their skin. They struggled, but the more they fought, the tighter the chains became. The whispers grew louder, turning into screams. The walls seemed to pulse, the blood flowing like rivers. Shadows danced around the room, forming grotesque shapes that loomed over the trapped friends. Emily, her voice shaking with terror, began to recite a prayer. But the shadows only seemed to grow angrier, their forms becoming more distinct. Faces twisted in agony emerged from the darkness, their mouths open in silent screams. The table in the center of the room began to shake, and with a loud crack, it split open, revealing a dark, gaping hole. From the depths, a figure emerged, an emaciated man with hollow eyes and a twisted grin. His skin was stretched tight over his bones, and his fingers ended in long, sharp claws. "Welcome to my domain," he rasped, his voice like nails on a chalkboard. "I've been waiting for you." The friends screamed as the figure advanced, his eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The chains tightened further, pulling them towards the table, towards the darkness that awaited below. And then, with a final, blood-curdling scream, the room went dark. The darkness was suffocating, pressing in on them from all sides. The friends could no longer see each other, only feel the cold metal of the chains digging into their flesh. Their breaths came in panicked gasps, the air thick with fear and the metallic scent of blood. Suddenly, a dim light flickered on, illuminating the room in a ghostly glow. The emaciated figure stood at the edge of the table, his hollow eyes fixed on them. With a wave of his hand, the chains loosened slightly, allowing them to stand but not to escape. "I am Malachi," he hissed, his voice echoing in the chamber. "Keeper of the Red Room. For centuries, I have collected souls, feeding on the fear and pain of those who dare to enter." Mark, trying to muster courage, stepped forward. "We didn't come here to die," he said, his voice wavering. "We came to prove this place was just a story." Malachi's grin widened, revealing rows of sharp, yellow teeth. "Oh, but you will die," he said, "and your souls will join the countless others that fuel my existence." As he spoke, the room began to transform. The walls pulsed with life, the blood flowing faster, dripping onto the floor in thick, crimson rivulets. The faces in the shadows grew more distinct, their eyes filled with torment. Sarah, shaking uncontrollably, tried to pull away from the chains. "We have to find a way out," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. Jake, his face pale with fear, scanned the room for any means of escape. "There has to be something," he said desperately. "A hidden door, a weak wall, anything." Emily, still whispering prayers under her breath, noticed something on the far wall. A series of symbols carved into the stone, glowing faintly. "Look," she said, pointing. "Those symbols, they might mean something." Malachi's eyes narrowed. "You cannot escape," he growled. "This room is your tomb." Ignoring him, Mark, Jake, and Sarah moved towards the symbols, dragging the chains behind them. Emily followed, her eyes fixed on the carvings. As they got closer, the symbols grew brighter, illuminating a pattern that seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy. "These look like runes," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "Maybe we can use them to break the curse." Malachi let out a guttural laugh. "Fools," he spat. "Those runes are a part of the room's power. They bind you here as much as the chains do." Desperation mounting, Mark reached out and touched one of the runes. Instantly, a shock of pain shot through his arm, and he recoiled with a cry. But as he did, the rune flickered, its light dimming for a moment. "Did you see that?" Jake said. "Maybe if we can disrupt the runes, we can weaken the room's hold on us." Gathering their courage, the friends began to work together, touching and striking the runes despite the pain. Each time, the runes flickered, their light growing weaker. The chains began to loosen further, and the faces in the walls screamed in silent agony. Malachi howled in rage, his form flickering like a glitching hologram.
"No."
"You cannot break the bond." With a final, desperate push, the friends struck the last rune. The room shuddered violently, and the chains fell away, clattering to the floor. The red glow intensified, blinding them, and the air was filled with a deafening roar. When the light faded, they found themselves outside the mansion, the storm still raging around them. The once imposing structure now lay in ruins, its dark power broken. They were free, but as they stumbled away from the wreckage, bruised and battered, a haunting thought lingered in their minds. The Red Room was destroyed, but Malachi's parting words echoed in their ears. "You may have escaped, but the curse is far from over. I will return, and when I do, your souls will be mine." And as they disappeared into the night, they knew the terror of the Red Room would haunt them forever. The friends stumbled away from the ruins of the mansion, the storm still raging around them. They were drenched, shivering, and covered in dirt and blood, but they were alive. The fear that had gripped them inside the Red Room slowly began to fade, replaced by the relief of having escaped. "Is everyone okay?" Mark asked, looking at his friends. Sarah, Jake, and Emily nodded, though their faces were pale and their eyes haunted. "We need to get help," Sarah said, her voice shaky. "Tell someone what happened." "But who would believe us?" Jake countered. "They'll think we're crazy." Emily looked back at the crumbling mansion, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and determination. "We have to try. People need to know the truth about that place." They made their way back to town, supporting each other as they walked. When they reached the nearest house, they banged on the door, desperate for help. An elderly couple answered, their faces filled with concern at the sight of the bedraggled group. The friends were taken in, given blankets and hot drinks. They recounted their harrowing ordeal to the couple, who listened with growing horror. The couple called the police, and soon the friends were telling their story again, this time to skeptical officers. Despite their initial disbelief, the police agreed to investigate. They found the ruins of the mansion just as the friends had described, along with remnants of the chains and the eerie carvings on the walls. The evidence was enough to convince them that something terrible had happened. The friends were treated for their injuries and given time to recover. News of their ordeal spread through the town, and people began to believe that maybe there was some truth to the old legends after all. As weeks turned into months, the friends tried to move on with their lives, but the experience had left deep scars. They stayed in close contact, supporting each other through nightmares and lingering fears. They avoided talking about Malachi and the Red Room, hoping that by not speaking of it, they could keep the darkness at bay. One night, as the friends gathered for dinner at Mark's apartment, Emily brought out a book she had been researching. "I've been looking into the history of that mansion," she said, her voice serious. There were reports of disappearances dating back over a century. People said the place was cursed. "Why bring this up now?" Sarah asked, her voice tinged with anxiety. Emily took a deep breath. "Because I think we need to do something. We barely escaped, but Malachi is still out there, and who knows if someone else might stumble upon that place." Jake shook his head. "What can we do? We barely made it out alive." Mark leaned forward, determination in his eyes. "Emily's right. We can't just forget about this. We need to find a way to stop Malachi for good." They spent the next few weeks researching, gathering information on ancient rituals and ways to banish malevolent spirits. They found references to an old ritual that could potentially sever Malachi's ties to the mortal world, but it required them to return to the ruins of the mansion. Armed with knowledge and resolve, the friends returned to the site on a moonless night. The ruins loomed ominously, but they pressed on, their fear overshadowed by their determination. They set up the ritual space, drawing protective circles and chanting the ancient incantations they had learned. As they completed the ritual, the air grew cold and a familiar, chilling presence filled the space. Malachi appeared before them, his hollow eyes blazing with fury. "You dare to challenge me?" he roared, his form flickering with malevolent energy. "Your reign of terror ends now," Mark declared, holding up a talisman inscribed with ancient symbols. The friends joined hands, their voices rising in unison as they chanted the final words of the ritual. The talisman glowed brightly, and Malachi let out a piercing scream as he was enveloped in a blinding light. His form twisted and contorted, the shadows consuming him until he was nothing more than a wisp of smoke, which dissipated into the night. Silence fell over the ruins, the oppressive weight of Malachi's presence lifted. The friends collapsed, exhausted but relieved. They had done it. They had banished the evil that had haunted the Red Room for centuries. As dawn broke, they left the site, feeling a sense of closure. They knew that the memories of their ordeal would never completely fade, but they had faced their fears and triumphed. The curse of the Red Room was broken, and they could finally move forward, their bond stronger than ever. Together, they walked into the light of a new day, leaving the darkness of the past behind.